I'm Daisy, 34 female. I live in a modest but comfortable condo downtown, a place I bought with my own hard-earned money from my career as a financial analyst. My life is a testament to careful planning and discipline, qualities my dad instilled in me from a young age. This story is about the time I tried to share the fruits of that labor with family, only to find out that for some people, generosity is just an invitation for greed. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My father, David, always said that money doesn't build character, it reveals it. He was a contractor, a man whose worth was measured in the straightness of his lines and the strength of his foundations, not the balance in his bank account. He and my mom raised me in a small house where the budget was tight, but our lives were rich with love and lessons in integrity. We didn't have much, but we had enough, and more importantly, we had a deep respect for the work it took to earn it. We fixed things that were broken, we saved for what we wanted, and we never, ever took a handout for granted. This upbringing was in stark contrast to the one my cousin Leo had. My dad's sister, Aunt Carol, had married a man who made a decent living, and she'd spent her life cultivating an air of effortless superiority. Even after her husband passed away, she maintained the facade, living off a life insurance policy and a carefully curated image of suburban affluence. Her son, Leo, was the centerpiece of this image. He was 10 years younger than me, and I remembered him as a sweet, tow-headed kid who I used to build elaborate Lego castles with. But as he grew up, that sweetness curdled into a specific kind of arrogance, one nurtured by a mother who believed her son was destined for greatness without the inconvenience of effort. While I was taking on extra shifts at a diner to pay for my college textbooks, Leo was getting a new car for his 17th birthday. While I was learning to analyze market trends and build investment portfolios, Leo was learning how to drop the right brand names into conversation. I worked my way through college and then clawed my way up the corporate ladder at a competitive financial firm. It was grueling. There were years of 80-hour work weeks, of takeout meals eaten at my desk, of sacrificing weekends and holidays for deadlines. But I was good at it. I had my dad's practical mind and a knack for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. Slowly but surely, I built a life for myself my parents could only have dreamed of. I wasn't flashy with my money. I drove a reliable sedan, not a luxury sports car. I lived comfortably, but well below my means, investing the rest. The greatest joy my success brought me was the ability to take care of my dad after my mom passed away, ensuring he could retire without a single financial worry. About a year ago, Aunt Carol started dropping hints about Leo's struggles. He had graduated from a decent state university with a degree in marketing and a mountain of student debt. "It's just holding him back, Daisy," she'd sigh over the phone. "He's so brilliant, but this loan is like an anchor around his neck. He can't get ahead." I'd listen patiently, offering practical advice. Create a budget, look into refinancing, pick up a side hustle. My suggestions were always met with a polite but dismissive, "Oh, that's a nice idea, dear," before she would pivot back to complaining. Despite my reservations about his work ethic, a part of me still saw the little kid I used to play with. I remembered his bright, enthusiastic smile. Family is family, after all, and I knew firsthand the suffocating weight of debt. I saw how it could crush a person's spirit and limit their horizons. I had the means to help, to give him the clean slate I had worked so hard to achieve for myself. So, I made a decision. It was a huge one that required me to liquidate a significant portion of a high-performing stock portfolio I had been cultivating for years. The total came to just over $85,000. It wasn't just a number on a page, it was years of my life, distilled into a single figure. It was the vacation to Italy I'd postponed, the down payment on a larger home I'd considered, the countless late nights I'd pushed through. It was a sacrifice, but I told myself it was for a good cause. It was for family. My plan was to announce it at Thanksgiving. The whole family would be there, gathered at Aunt Carol's house, as was tradition. I imagined the moment with a warm glow, I'd make a little speech, present Leo with a card explaining what I'd done, and see the look of pure relief and gratitude wash over his face. I pictured him getting a real start in life, free from the burden that plagued so many people his age. I thought it would bring us closer, bridging the gap that had grown between our two very different worlds. I genuinely believed this act of generosity would be a turning point, not just for him, but for our entire family. It would be a gesture that said, "We are all in this together, and when one of us succeeds, we all succeed." I spent weeks planning it, filled with a sense of quiet, profound excitement. I was about to give my cousin the gift of freedom, a gift I thought was priceless. I had no idea how little he would value it. Thanksgiving at Aunt Carol's was always a production. The good china was brought out, the silverware was polished to a blinding sheen, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and a faint undercurrent of family tension. Carol glided through the rooms like a queen in her court, accepting compliments on her cooking while subtly judging everyone else's contributions to the potluck. My dad and I usually brought a simple, honest pumpkin pie from a recipe my mom had perfected, and it always sat on the dessert table like a humble commoner amongst Carol's ostentatious, multi-layered cakes. Leo arrived late, as usual, dressed in designer jeans and a trendy jacket that probably cost more than my entire outfit. He breezed in, offering air kisses and casual haze before making a beeline for the appetizers. He had that easy, practiced charm that so many people mistook for confidence. He spoke loudly about his job at the marketing firm, exaggerating his role and dropping names of minor local celebrities he'd supposedly met. Aunt Carol watched him with a look of pure adoration hanging on his every word. My dad caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small, knowing smile. We didn't need to say anything. We had seen this performance 100 times before. I felt a pang of doubt. Was this really the struggling young man his mother described? He didn't look like someone with an anchor tied around his neck. He looked like he was about to set sail on a yacht, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was why I was doing this. My gift would remove the one obstacle standing between this charming facade and genuine success. It would ground him, give him a reason to be truly grateful. After we had all eaten our fill and were slumped in our chairs in a turkey-induced stupor, I decided it was time. My heart started to beat a little faster. I had a simple white envelope in my purse, and inside was a card. On the card, I had written a heartfelt message and included a printout of the transaction confirmation, showing the full $85,241.37 balance of his student loans paid in full. I had made the payment 3 days earlier, so it would be fully cleared by Thanksgiving. It was done, irreversible, a completed act of love. Could I have everyone's attention for just a moment? I asked, my voice a little shaky. The chatter died down and all eyes turned to me. I stood up, clutching the envelope in my hands. "I have something I want to say," I began, looking around the room at the familiar faces of my family. I know that we all come from different places and have walked different paths, but the one thing that connects us is that we're family. And family should be there to support one another, to lift each other up. I turned my gaze to Leo, who was looking at his phone, only half listening. Aunt Carol nudged him, and he finally looked up, a bored expression on his face. "Leo," I said, my voice warming with the emotion I had been holding back all day. "I know how hard it can be starting out. I remember what it was like to feel the pressure of student debt, and I know how much you want to build a great future for yourself. You're a smart, capable young man, and I want to see you fly. So, I decided to give you a little help to get you started." I paused for effect, a smile spreading across my face. I saw my dad looking at me, his eyes shining with pride. I held out the envelope to Leo. "As of this week," I announced, my voice ringing with joy, "your entire student loan has been paid off. You are completely debt-free. Happy Thanksgiving, cousin." For a split second, there was stunned silence. Leo's eyes widened, and he took the envelope from my hand. He opened it, read the card, and looked at the confirmation sheet. A slow smile spread across his face, the $1 million smile I remembered from his childhood. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. But then, the moment shattered. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. He looked up from the paper, not at me, but at the room, as if playing to an audience. He rolled his eyes in a theatrical, exaggerated way. "Wow, thanks, I guess," he said, the words dripping with condescension. He tossed the card onto the coffee table like it was a piece of junk mail. Then he looked directly at me, his charming smile twisting into a smug smirk. "But if you really cared, you'd do my car loan too." The air was sucked out of the room. My smile froze and then melted off my face. I stared at him, unable to process what I had just heard. It felt like a physical blow. The warmth and joy that had filled me just seconds before turned to ice in my veins. My dad's proud expression had been replaced by one of disbelief and fury. The rest of the family just stared, their mouths hanging open, unsure of how to react. The only person who didn't seem shocked was Aunt Carol. She let out a little tittering laugh, as if Leo had just made the cleverest joke in the world. "Oh, that's my Leo," she said, beaming. "Always aiming higher." And in that moment, I didn't see the little boy I used to build castles with. I saw a stranger. A greedy, ungrateful stranger who had taken the most significant, heartfelt gift I had ever given and spat on it. The foundations of my generosity crumbled, and all I was left with was the cold, hard realization that my dad was right. Money doesn't build character. It just reveals the gaping, empty hole where it's supposed to be. The silence that followed Leo's pronouncement was heavier than any argument. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of awkwardness. A few people coughed. Someone nervously scraped their fork against a dessert plate. No one knew what to say, and no one dared to look at me. My vision narrowed until the only things I could see were Leo's smug face and my aunt's idiotic, beaming smile. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sharp. I felt like I had just stood on a stage, poured my heart out, and been booed by the one person the performance was for. I needed to get out of there. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the living room, heading for the back porch. My legs felt unsteady, like they might give out from under me. I pushed open the sliding glass door and stepped into the chilly November air. The cold was a welcome shock, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of my own shame. I wrapped my arms around myself, not just against the cold, but as if trying to hold myself together. The sound of the party slowly faded back in behind me, a nervous laugh here, a clatter of dishes there. They were trying to pretend it hadn't happened. They were trying to smooth over the gaping wound that had just been torn open in the middle of their perfect Thanksgiving tableau. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring out at Aunt Carol's manicured lawn, replaying the scene in my head. Had I misread the situation so completely? I had imagined tears of gratitude, a heartfelt hug, a sense of relief. Instead, I got a demand for more. It wasn't just ungrateful, it was predatory. It was as if he'd seen my generosity not as a gift, but as a sign of weakness, an untapped resource to be further exploited. The $85,000 I had given him wasn't enough. It had only whetted his appetite. Just as I was starting to get my breathing under control, I heard voices from the kitchen, their words drifting through the slightly ajar window next to the porch. It was Aunt Carol, talking to one of my other aunts, Susan. "I don't see what the big deal is," Carol was saying, her voice laced with a defensive whine. "Daisy makes an obscene amount of money. For her, that $85,000 is probably what I'd spend on groceries. She was just showing off, making a big spectacle of it to make herself look good." My blood ran cold. Showing off? I thought of the weekends I had given up, the stress I had endured, the careful planning that went into accumulating that money. It was anything but a casual expense. Aunt Susan murmured something I couldn't quite hear, probably a weak attempt at defending me. But Carol cut her off. "And Leo was just being honest," she continued, her voice rising. "He's ambitious. He sees the big picture. Why shouldn't he ask for more?" Daisy opened the door. "If she's going to play Lady Bountiful, she shouldn't be so sensitive when people treat her like it. Honestly, for a financial analyst, she's surprisingly emotional." The words hit me harder than Leo's comment had. Leo was an entitled brat, but he was young and foolish. This was something else entirely. This was a calculated, venomous narrative my own aunt was spinning just minutes after I had made an incredible sacrifice for her son. She wasn't just excusing his behavior. She was justifying it by painting me as a boastful, out-of-touch millionaire who deserved to be taken advantage of. The betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just one person's entitlement I was up against. It was a deeply ingrained family philosophy, a parasitic worldview where my success was not my own, but a resource to be shared, or rather, siphoned off. Suddenly, the porch door slid open. It was my dad. He had a look on his face I hadn't seen since the day my mom passed, a mixture of deep sadness and protective anger. He didn't say anything at first, just came and stood beside me, putting his warm, calloused hand on my shoulder. "I heard that too," he said, his voice a low rumble. Tears I hadn't even realized were forming finally spilled over and ran down my cheeks. "I can't believe it, Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was doing something good." "You did do something good, Daisy," he said firmly, turning to face me. "You acted from the heart. That is never a mistake. The mistake was thinking they had hearts to receive it." He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket. He always carried one, just like his father before him, and handed it to me. "I am so sorry, sweetheart. I am so sorry you had to find out like this. But I am proud of you. Not for the money, I couldn't care less about that. I'm proud of your kindness. Don't ever let people like them take that away from you." His words were a balm on a raw wound. He wasn't telling me I was overreacting. He wasn't telling me to let it go for the sake of family peace. He was validating my pain, my anger, and my disillusionment. He saw what I saw, that this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. It was a fundamental difference in character, a chasm between those who give and those who only know how to take. We stood there in silence for another minute, the distant sounds of the party a mockery of the term family. The hurt was still there, a throbbing ache in my chest, but it was now being joined by something else, a cold, clear-eyed anger. The whispers I'd overheard hadn't just been insults, they were a gift. They were the truth laid bare. Aunt Carol and Leo hadn't just revealed their character, they had revealed my next course of action. I had made a payment on a debt, but I had made a massive miscalculation in my emotional ledger. And as a financial analyst, I knew there was only one thing to do when you discover a bad investment. You cut your losses. The drive home from Thanksgiving was quiet. My dad sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his jaw tight. The pumpkin pie we'd brought sat untouched in a container on the back seat. Neither of us had the stomach for it. The events of the evening replayed in my mind on a loop. Leo's smirk, Aunt Carol's proud little laugh, the whispers from the kitchen. It was like a puzzle, and with each replay, more pieces clicked into place, revealing a picture that was uglier and older than I had ever imagined. This wasn't a new development. It was a pattern, and I had been blind to it for years. In the week that followed, I became an archaeologist of my own family history, digging through layers of memory. I remembered Christmases when I would receive a thoughtful, handmade gift from my parents, while Leo would be unwrapping the latest, most expensive video game console, a gift Aunt Carol would later complain about having to put on a credit card. I recalled birthdays where she would subtly compare my modest celebrations to the lavish parties she threw for Leo, always with a tone that implied our frugality was a lack of love. I called my dad one evening, needing to talk it through. "Dad," I started, "was it always like this? Have I just not been paying attention?" He let out a long sigh. "Daisy, your mother and I tried to shield you from the worst of it when you were young. Carol, she always had a taste for the good life but never the patience to work for it. When her husband was alive, he could fund it. After he passed, she had the insurance money, but she lives like it's a bottomless well. She's always seen us with our careful savings and our paid-off mortgage, not as responsible, but as hoarders, like we were holding out on her." He told me stories I'd never heard. About the times Carol had borrowed a few $1,000s from them for a minor emergency, which later turned out to be a weekend spa trip for her and a friend. The money was never paid back, of course. Any attempt to bring it up was met with accusations of being cheap and unsupportive. He told me how, when I got my first big promotion, Carol's first reaction wasn't congratulations, but a joke about how I could finally afford to take the whole family on a cruise. She raised Leo in that environment, Dad concluded, his voice heavy. She taught him that success isn't something you build, it's something you're owed, and that other people's hard work is just a resource for him to tap into. Your gift, as generous as it was, didn't register as a gift to them. It registered as an installment payment, the first of many. His words confirmed the sick feeling in my stomach. I decided to do a little more digging, not to be vindictive, but because my analyst brain couldn't let go of the problem. I needed all the data. I started with Leo's car. He'd mentioned a car loan. A quick, perfectly legal search on public records databases, a skill I'd honed for vetting potential investments, told me everything I needed to know. The car was a brand new luxury SUV, the kind a mid-level executive might drive, not an entry-level marketing coordinator. The loan on it was substantial, with monthly payments that must have eaten up a huge chunk of his salary. Then, out of a morbid curiosity, I looked at his social media profiles, which were all public. His online life was a curated fantasy of expensive brunches, weekend trips to trendy cities, and photos of him wearing clothes and watches that were far beyond his means. There were no signs of a young man struggling under a mountain of debt. It was the portrait of someone living a life he couldn't afford, funded by credit cards, and, I now suspected, a steady stream of cash from his mother, who was likely going into her own debt to maintain their shared illusion of wealth. The student loan wasn't an anchor holding him back from basic survival. It was an inconvenience preventing him from escalating his lavish lifestyle. He didn't want it gone so he could build a stable future. He wanted it gone so he could qualify for a higher credit limit for his next big purchase. My gift wasn't a lifeline. It was a stepping stone to more profound irresponsibility. The final piece of the puzzle came from a conversation with my Aunt Susan, the one who had been in the kitchen. With Carol, she called me a few days after Thanksgiving, her voice full of apology. "Daisy, I'm so sorry for what happened, and for what Carol said. I should have spoken up, but she can be intimidating." I told her it was okay, that I understood. Then I gently probed. Has she always been so, worried about money? Susan let out a bitter laugh. "Worried? Daisy, she's drowning. She remortgaged her house 2 years ago. I only know because my husband works at the bank. She spends money like water and has taught Leo to do the same. She told me last month that she was counting on you to step up for the family one day. She said it was your duty, now that you were the one with the real money." My duty? The phrase echoed in my head. They had been planning this. My generosity wasn't a surprise to them, it was an expectation. They had been waiting for me to step up, and my Thanksgiving announcement was just the opening of the floodgates. Leo's demand for the car loan wasn't a spontaneous moment of ingratitude, it was the next item on their agenda. All the hurt and humiliation I had felt began to recede, replaced by a steely, cold resolve. This was no longer just about a rude comment at a family gathering. This was about a long, calculated history of manipulation and entitlement. They had viewed my hard work, my discipline, my sacrifice, as nothing more than their future safety net. They had already spent my money in their minds, long before I ever had it. They saw me not as a person, but as a walking, talking bank account to be used for their convenience. I had made a payment, yes, but I had paid the wrong entity. The debt wasn't Leo's student loan. The true debt was the lifetime of respect and decency they owed my side of the family, a debt they had clearly defaulted on long ago. My analyst brain took over. I had all the data. I had identified the toxic asset. Now I needed a strategy to divest. For about 48 hours after my conversation with Aunt Susan, my anger simmered. I considered the easy way out, ghosting them. Block Aunt Carol's number, unfriend Leo on social media, and simply never attend another family event at her house. It was tempting. It would be quiet, clean, and would require no confrontation. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like a retreat, not a victory. If I just disappeared, they would control the narrative. In their version of the story, I would be the overly emotional, flaky niece who made a grand promise and then vanished when her feelings got hurt. They would paint themselves as the victims of my instability, and some members of the family would undoubtedly believe them. No, I couldn't let that happen. My father didn't raise me to back down from a fight, especially not one about principle. This wasn't about the money anymore. The $85,000 was gone, and I accepted that. This was about accountability. They had shown me their true character, and I felt a profound obligation to show them the consequences of their actions. They needed to understand, in no uncertain terms, what they had lost. Not just the money, but my respect, my support, and my presence in their lives. And it couldn't be a private conversation. Their insult was public, so the lesson had to be public as well. My mind, accustomed to creating detailed financial strategies, began to formulate a plan. It was methodical, precise, and had a clear objective. It revolved around a single, powerful prop: a check. The first step was a phone call. I pulled up the student loan servicer's website and found their customer service number. I explained that I was a third party who had recently made a lump sum payment to pay off a relative's account. I told them there had been a significant family misunderstanding, and I needed to know if the payment could be reversed. The agent was sympathetic but firm. Once a payment of that size clears, especially from an external bank account, it's final. It cannot be clawed back. The funds were already dispersed, the account closed. That's a settled debt, ma'am, he said. I knew this would likely be the case, but I needed to confirm it. Hearing those words, a settled debt, lit a fire in me. My impulsive act of kindness was permanent. I couldn't undo the payment, but that didn't mean I couldn't undo the gift. The money was gone, but the narrative was still mine to write. My plan solidified. I needed to create a new focal point, an object that would symbolize the entire transaction. I went to my bank the next day. I spoke with the branch manager and had a certified check drawn up. The payee was Leo, last name, student loan payoff. The amount was exactly what I had paid, $85,241.37. A certified check wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a guarantee. It was as good as cash. It looked official, weighty, and irrefutable. It was the physical manifestation of my generosity. It would be my centerpiece. The next step was setting the stage. I couldn't wait for another holiday. The confrontation needed to happen soon, while the Thanksgiving incident was still fresh in everyone's minds. I decided the following Sunday would be perfect. I called Aunt Carol. My tone was apologetic and slightly meek, a performance I loathed, but it was a necessary part of the trap. Aunt Carol, I began, forcing a sigh into my voice. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I feel just awful about how things went down at Thanksgiving. I think I might have overreacted. I put Leo on the spot, and I shouldn't have done that. I could almost hear her preening through the phone. Well, Daisy, it was a bit dramatic, she said, her voice dripping with condescension disguised as sympathy. I know, I continued. And I want to make it right. I have the check for him, the official bank check. I'd like to drop it off this Sunday. And I want to apologize to him and you in person, maybe around 2 p.m. The bait was taken instantly. Oh, that would be lovely, dear. I'll make sure Leo is here. That's very mature of you. To ensure I had the right audience, I made 2 more calls. One to Aunt Susan and one to another cousin I was close with, Mark. I told them both that I was going over to Carol's to clear the air and that I'd appreciate their presence for moral support. I knew word would travel, and a few other relatives would likely show up out of sheer curiosity. The stage was set. Finally, I prepared my speech. I didn't write it down word for word because I didn't want to sound robotic. Instead, I outlined the key points on a notepad. I would start with the concept of work and sacrifice. I would talk about my dad and the values he taught me. I would validate my own success as something I had earned, not something I had stumbled into. Then, I would hold up the check, the tangible proof of my intent. I would pivot to Leo, acknowledging his words and his mother's defense of them. I would calmly lay out the facts I had uncovered about his lifestyle. And then, the finale. The tearing of the check. The delivery of the line that had been repeating in my head for days. I rehearsed it in my apartment, speaking the words out loud to an empty room. I practiced keeping my voice steady, my hands from shaking. This wasn't about rage or revenge. It was about delivering a financial report on their character. It would be calm, it would be factual, and it would be absolutely devastating. By the time Sunday morning arrived, I felt no nervousness, only a cold, resolute calm. The plan was in motion. The point of no return had been reached. I pulled up to Aunt Carol's house at exactly 2:00 p.m. on Sunday. I took a deep breath before getting out of the car, clutching the stiff bank envelope in my hand. It felt solid, real. As I walked up the driveway, I could see through the large front window that my plan had worked. Not only were Aunt Carol and Leo there, but so were Aunt Susan, my cousin Mark, and 2 other relatives who had clearly come for the drama. It was the perfect audience. Leo opened the door before I had a chance to ring the bell. He had a wide, triumphant smirk on his face, the look of a victor accepting a surrender. "Hey, Daisy, come on in," he said, his tone oozing false magnanimity. Aunt Carol was right behind him, her expression a mixture of smug satisfaction and pity. "Daisy, dear, we're so glad you came to your senses," she said, patting my arm condescendingly as I stepped inside. They led me into the living room, the scene of the original crime. Everyone was seated, watching me with rapt attention. It felt like I was walking into a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided in my absence. They motioned for me to sit, but I remained standing. I wanted to be on my feet for this. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice even and calm, resonating with more confidence than I felt. I wanted to clear the air about Thanksgiving. I've done a lot of reflecting this past week, and I realize I made a mistake. Aunt Carol nodded sagely, exchanging a glance with Leo. "It's all right, dear, we forgive you." I held up a hand. "Please, let me finish." The room fell silent again. My mistake was not in the gift itself, but in my understanding of what it meant. I was raised to believe that hard work is a virtue. My father, as you all know, worked with his hands his entire life. He built things that last. He taught me that you don't get something for nothing in this world, and that you should respect the sweat and sacrifice that goes into earning a living. I took that lesson to heart. I've worked very hard for my success. It wasn't a lottery win. It was a choice I made every day for 15 years, a choice to study harder, work longer, and sacrifice more. I let that sink in for a moment, my eyes sweeping across the room before landing on Leo. I pulled the certified check from the envelope. It was crisp and official. I held it up so everyone could see. "This is a certified check for $85,241.37, I said, enunciating each word clearly. "I had it drawn up to represent the student loan debt that I paid off on your behalf, Leo. I did this because I truly wanted to give you a head start, a foundation upon which you could build your own success." Leo's eyes were glued to the check, a hungry look on his face. He actually started to reach for it. "But then," I continued, pulling the check back slightly, "you made it clear that a foundation wasn't what you wanted. You wanted a penthouse, fully furnished and paid for by someone else. You rolled your eyes at a gift that represents years of my life and had the audacity to demand more." Leo's smirk faltered. Aunt Carol opened her mouth to interrupt, but I kept going, my voice gaining strength. "I was willing to write off your comment as youthful arrogance. But then, Aunt Carol, I heard you in the kitchen. You said I was showing off. You said I had obscene money, as if it were a character flaw. You defended your son's greed by calling it ambition. You revealed that you don't see my success as something I've earned. You see it as a resource that you are owed, a duty I have to you." The color drained from Aunt Carol's face. She looked like she'd been slapped. "So I looked deeper," I said, my gaze now locked on Leo. "Your ambition isn't to build a career, Leo. It's to build an image funded by debt. A brand new SUV you can't afford, a social media feed full of expenses you can't sustain. This student loan wasn't an anchor, it was an inconvenience. It was getting in the way of more debt, more showing off. "Now you listen here," Leo started, rising from his chair, his face turning red with anger. "No, you listen," I cut him off, my voice sharp and clear as glass. "I made a payment, it's true. The bank has confirmed it's irreversible. The loan is paid, but a payment is not a gift. A gift requires gratitude to be complete. You rejected the gift, so I am rescinding it." I looked down at the certified check in my hands, the beautiful, official pike. "E of paper." "This check represents the money," I said, "but the money is just a symbol. It symbolizes my work, my respect, my love. You value none of those things, you only value the money." Then, with everyone watching, I brought my hands together and deliberately, slowly, tore the check in half. The ripping sound was shockingly loud in the silent room. I tore the two halves into quarters. A collective gasp went through the room. Leo stared at the pieces of paper as if I had physically assaulted him. I let the torn pieces flutter from my fingers onto the polished surface of Aunt Carol's coffee table. They lay there like a declaration of war. I looked directly into Leo's stunned, furious eyes and delivered the line I had been waiting all week to say. "The payment to the bank is gone. That's my loss. But this money, this gift, is no longer yours. You want me to pay off your car loan? I wouldn't even pay for your car wash. So enjoy your credit score. From what I've seen of your spending habits, it's about to be the only thing lower than your manners." I didn't wait for a response. There was nothing more to say. I turned my back on their shocked, enraged faces and walked out of the house. The front door clicked shut behind me, and in that moment, I felt a profound, exhilarating sense of freedom. The debt had been settled after all. The fallout was immediate and exactly as dramatic as I had anticipated. Before I had even pulled away from the curb, my phone started buzzing. A text from Leo, a string of furious, misspelled insults. Then a call from Aunt Carol, which I ignored. It went to voicemail, and the message she left was a hysterical, rambling tirade that was part accusation, part threat, and part sob story. I listened to the first 10 seconds before deleting it. Over the next few weeks, the family split into predictable factions. Aunt Carol launched a smear campaign, telling anyone who would listen that I was a cruel, vindictive shrew who had publicly humiliated her poor, innocent son over a simple joke. According to her, I had dangled my wealth in their faces only to snatch it away, proving I was unstable and heartless. A few relatives, the ones who always enabled her, sided with her completely. They sent me sanctimonious messages about the importance of forgiveness and keeping the family together, all while conveniently ignoring the behavior that had caused the rift in the first place. I blocked them all. My dad was my rock through the whole thing. He fielded angry calls on my behalf, his responses brief and unwavering. "Daisy did what she thought was right," he would say, "and I support her." My Aunt Susan, my cousin Mark, and a few others also reached out, not with judgment but with support. "It was shocking," Mark told me over the phone, "but honestly, it was something that needed to happen years ago. You just had the courage to finally do it." The family was fractured, yes, but I realized it wasn't broken. The toxic, diseased limb had simply been amputated, allowing the healthy parts to heal. With the drama slowly fading, a new question emerged. What to do with the money? Not the money I had already spent on Leo's loan. That was a sunk cost, an expensive lesson learned. But I had been prepared to give that amount away, and the spirit of that generosity still felt important. I didn't want this experience to make me bitter or closed off. I wanted to transform it into something positive, to reclaim the good intention that had been so thoroughly abused. After much thought, I decided on a path that felt right. I contacted the financial aid office at the community college my mom had attended years ago. Working with them, I established the Eleanor Vance Memorial Scholarship, named after my mother. It wasn't a huge, glamorous fund, but it was designed to provide 2 full-ride scholarships each year to students from low-income backgrounds who were the first in their families to attend college. The initial endowment was exactly $85,241.37. It was the same amount of money, but this time, it was an investment in character, not a bailout for a lack of it. The following spring, I received a packet from the college containing letters from the first two recipients of the scholarship. One was a young woman who wanted to be a nurse, and the other was a young man studying to be a mechanic. They wrote about their families, their struggles, and their dreams. Their letters were filled with such genuine, overwhelming gratitude that it brought tears to my eyes. This was the reaction I had hoped for all those months ago. This was what true appreciation felt like. It wasn't about the amount, it was about the opportunity. A year passed, the holidays approached again. There was no invitation from Aunt Carol, for which I was grateful. Instead, my dad and I decided to host our own Thanksgiving. It was a small affair. Just us, Aunt Susan and her husband, my cousin Mark, and a couple of close friends. We cooked tojith. In my kitchen, the smell of roasting turkey filling my condo not with tension, but with warmth and laughter. There was no fine china, no performance, no judgment. We ate on my everyday dishes and drank wine from mismatched glasses. We went around the table, saying what we were thankful for. When it was my turn, I looked at the faces of the people I loved, people who respected and supported me unconditionally. "I'm thankful for clarity," I said, "for learning the difference between an obligation and a gift, and I'm thankful for small, quiet gatherings like this one." My dad raised his glass, his eyes meeting mine. "To clarity," he said, and everyone echoed him. I never heard directly from Leo or Aunt Carol again. I heard through the family grapevine that Leo, without my financial cushion, had to sell his flashy SUV and was struggling with credit card debt. Aunt Carol had apparently soured on the idea of my obscene wealth and now told people I was likely on the verge of bankruptcy. The narrative kept shifting to suit their needs. I found I didn't care. Their opinions had no power over me anymore. I had lost a piece of my family, but I had gained a profound sense of peace. I had learned that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is to stop giving to those who don't deserve it. My life was quieter now, my family circle smaller, but my foundations were stronger than ever. And that was something to be truly thankful for.